Welcome to me talking about Chapter 1 of Wimpy, Weak, and Woke, written by John Cooper, who is a self-described rock star. Now, this is important later on, but for now, we're going to ignore my hair. I talk more about who John Cooper is and why I read this book back in my previous video about the prologue to this book, so we're just going to jump right into it. The actual chapter starts with John talking about how when he was 24, an older woman made him feel uncomfortable by hugging him and not letting go for a while. He had talked about his mother's passing because it is part of his testimony, and she told him to think of her as a mother figure. He repeatedly insinuates it was possibly sexual, or that people would think it was sexual, calling it inappropriate. 6 months later, at a different show, the woman showed up again. However, this time tried to kiss him on the lips. He says she got upset that he turned his head to the side to avoid that happening. She apparently said he can't do that because she was his mom now. He said he felt physically sick and was visually shaken from this interaction, again saying he felt fear that she was sexually into him. He calls himself wimpy and weak for not standing up for himself and not putting a stop to the situation that made him feel uncomfortable. Now, I wasn't there, I have no idea what the lady was actually thinking. I know my grandfather would kiss family on the mouth, and it was completely innocent, it was just kind of old-timey, but he actually stopped doing that when people told him that they felt uncomfortable. But no matter what it was for this older lady, this incident made John Cooper uncomfortable, and she was in his personal space. But I say to you at home, if it was a gender swap situation, would anyone think that person was wimpy and weak? No, of course not. I don't think John should view himself as wimpy and weak at all. However, that being said, I also disagree with this line John wrote about his wife, who walked away when the woman was approaching after the second show. It's her one moment of unfaithfulness to me in our 25 years of marriage, so I've decided to forgive her. I don't know, something about that just kind of rubs me the wrong way. Anyways, the point of that story was how choosing politeness over principles has sadly become a hallmark to the modern church. Within a few sentences, this somehow jumps to mean church leaders are doing immense damage to the church and to the world. I have no idea how the whole world is now involved in this church conversation. The whole world isn't Christian. Then right after, he says, just face it, the world is going to hate us, aka Christians. I want to emphasize how that's just not true. I have a bestie who is Christian, but of course John probably would say she isn't a real Christian because anyone that doesn't interpret the Bible exactly how he does aren't real Christians to him. Just don't tell John about all the different translations of the Bible and how men in power had say over how the Bible was taught. John goes on to bring up a guy named Douglas Murray. So of course I popped over to Wiki because that's all the effort I was going to give to looking up this guy. And it reads, academic and journalistic sources have variously described Murray's ideology and political views as conservative, neoconservative, far-right, alt-right, and Islamophobic. Alright, man. You gotta keep that guy. I don't want to be near him. Then John has the fucking nerve to say, if the secular culture is truly as open and tolerant as they claim, then why do they demand absolute adherence to their moral codes with the zeal of 1,000 burning suns? I want to emphasize that John says anyone that tries to fix the world without God, aka the same moral code as him, it will lead to, this is a quote, it will lead to grievance, hate, tyranny, chaos, and mass death. Not to mention all the people saying that I'm going to burn in hell simply for being me. I'm so glad I hung up this, because honestly, fuck off. Then he makes a comparison to Footloose, which reminds me so much of the scene of Wake Up Dead Man, where the guy compares himself and the father to the rebels in Star Wars. Like, you, John, really think you were the ones forced to dance in the secluded warehouse? You think you? You guys have actual church buildings. Whereas here in the States, I was able to get married before gay marriage was allowed in all 50 states. In my state, I was allowed to get married before gay marriage was allowed in this state. I want to emphasize, I'm not even 30 years old yet. Also, my own church said they didn't support hosting a service of any kind for a gay person. I wouldn't have been allowed to have my own funeral in the church I went to my whole life. And some said they didn't even want gay people to be allowed to attend the church as part of the congregation. Where I grew up, I didn't have a place to be myself. but Christians sure as heck did. John compares what I think is trans people to a person who believes that an army of leprechauns is stalking him in an attempt to steal his soul. I'm not really sure what that's like a metaphor for. I think it's just supposed to be like, oh, isn't this ludicrous? It doesn't really make sense, but okay. But there's more. And also to someone who says that he is a cat. At least the second one makes more sense as a parallel, albeit not a great one, but the first one confuses me. He says that being trans rejects who God made us. It ignores the crafted order. It questions the character of God who created distinctions and called them good. Again, not everyone believes in God, so on behalf of all of those people, I will say, who fucking cares? This isn't an argument at all for those people, because they don't believe in God. But also, what about pre-transition me, who prayed to God to see if testosterone was the right choice, if it was through God or not? I saw just how much the idea of testosterone made me happy, comfortable, and way less anxious. One could easily say that that was God's way of telling me that it was the right choice. The point is, people can very much be Christian and trans, despite John thinking his Christian morals are the only correct ones. He goes on to say that if being trans was real, spoiler it is, then it goes against God, and that it is a battle between the living God and the false god of man. It's funny because I don't remember the Bible ever mentioning trans people besides kind of one verse, Deuteronomy 22:5, that reads, "A woman must not wear men's clothes, nor a man wear women's clothing, for the Lord our God detests anyone who does this." But John does actually quote the Bible here, but not the verse I was thinking. He quotes Matthew 6:24. "No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other." However, if you look at the full verse, it ends with, "You can't serve both God and money." This verse is about money. It has nothing to do with gender, or gender roles, or biological sex, nor the idea of Christians being supportive of trans people. I guess I'm just confused because if you wanted to convince Christians not to support trans people, wouldn't you quote where it says not to, not a verse about money? We all build our lives on something. If we don't choose Christ as our foundation, we are choosing not Christ. Some reject this binary option and appeal to nuance. Well, yes. Like I said, some people are not Christians, and that is okay. If you want to lead your life following God, fine, but others don't have to. This feeds into the next part, which says, we study secular philosophy in schools. Yes. Because non-religious schools are not supposed to be teaching or pushing religion. If they did, then they wouldn't be secular. The quote continues, bashing studying facts via scientists and evolutionary biologists. I get it, I too grew up being told evolution was a lie, that people have came forward saying they lied about finding evidence of evolution, that they made it all up. But you know how to combat that? By researching, by looking up facts, by looking at the studies, looking at the people who are involved, not just by saying no to all of science. John continues, saying, quote, we study human nature via pop psychologists and Freudian psychotherapists. That goes to show you what John knows. People have been hating on Freud for decades. But also what's wrong with therapy? How is therapy anti-Christian? But let's just continue. We study morality via politicians and activists. Like I said before, John calls himself a rock star, and as much as he wants to distance himself from being political or this being a political book, it is one. He is being hypocritical. This part ends with John saying Christian leaders need to focus exclusively on God. He can argue within Christianity as much as he wants, that's not why I'm here. However, he does say these philosophies, secular humanism, teaches that humanity is capable of morality and self-fulfillment without belief in God. Yes, because like I said before, many do. Many people have morals and are self-fulfilled without believing in a god. John explicitly mentions egalitarian society in a negative light. On the wiki, there's this quote, one key aspect is its emphasis on equal opportunities for all individuals, regardless of their background or circumstances. This means ensuring that everyone has access to the same resources, education, and opportunities to succeed in life. Damn, John's so right. God would hate everyone being equal. Fuck Galatians 3:26 through 28. So, in Jesus Christ, we are all children of God through faith. For all of you who are baptized in Christ have clothed themselves in Christ. There is neither Jew nor Gentile, nor slave nor free, nor is there male or female. You are all one in Christ Jesus. John continues by saying, generally speaking, utopians' visions support tyranny, euthanasia, abortion, and demand the removal of children from parents to be raised by the government so that they can be societally influenced to have total devotion to the state rather than natural familiar bonds. I'm sorry, what the fuck was the last thing on that list? This line really threw me back to middle school when we read The Giver. Where in reality does this happen here in the United States? We'll talk a bit more about the rest of that in a second. For now, Cooper mentions yet another modern guy named Mark Livin. So you know I had to look him up on Wiki and, quote, a neoconservative. He is known for his staunch support of Israel and hawkish foreign policy. Cool. Just wanted us all to know the type of guy that John is aligning with. The next part says, even many Christians believe incorrectly that there is a general understanding of morality that all people agree with. No. Like I said in my last video talking about the prologue of this book, we all have our own line in the sand. This book goes on about how John thinks the Bible is the only reasonable and fixed way to lead to human flourishing, prosperity, and fulfillment. This is important because he says there is absolutely no nuance when it comes to the Bible. It also sickens me to hear people saying that just because someone isn't Christian or a particular way of being Christian, they can't actually be happy, which I said before is false. Then shit hits the fan with the most ridiculous example ever. Imagine if God created the reproduction process in such a way that only same-sex intercourse can produce children, but his moral command is for sex to be exclusively between a man and a woman. In that case, God's moral commands would work against the world that he created. All I can think is John really wanted to say something against gay people, and that's why he used it as an example here. I want to emphasize that in the United States, gay marriage has been legal for over 10 years now. Yay. And our humanity is not depleting. Humans are not on the decline. Gay people have always been here and have always been gay. This wasn't a gotcha moment. It's like that image of the airplane with the wings on the same side being a metaphor for how gay relations are illogical and don't work. It's just ridiculous and not actually a good metaphor for anything. Cooper then brings up abortion by saying, the church says that abortion is murder, while the culture says that abortion is a form of justice. If the world is correct and abortion is a form of justice, then the right to have an abortion leads to human flourishing. Well, what is human flourishing? Does he mean making babies? Because of course abortion doesn't lead to children, but the Bible also says no sex outside of marriage, and that would lead to children. Or does John mean the definition human flourishing is the complete goodness of humans in a developmental lifespan that includes positive psychological functioning and positive social functioning along with other basic goods? Or even, human flourishing is the ongoing fulfillment of human capabilities within given context by advancing one's own good and the common good. Because I can tell you that abortion, without a doubt, helps individuals. I want to state my credentials about talking about this matter. My father wanted to abort me. Therefore, I think I can speak about this. There's nothing wrong with getting an abortion, if you yourself want one. However, being forced or pressured into a decision you do not want yourself, give it that being an abortion or pregnancy is the exact opposite of flourishing. Also, side note, abortions can be for medical related reasons too, which clearly would result in flourishing. However, I don't know where John stands on this because other Christians I know distance themselves from these beliefs, saying that it's not an abortion despite it actively being one. John is really throwing argument after argument at the wall here. The next is saying that men dressing like women is immoral, and it leads to the destruction of society because it confuses creational norms. Didn't Adam and Eve not wear clothes at all? Does John think we wear the same clothes since the very beginning of the Bible? Even just from the New Testament to now, humans dress completely differently. Also, nowhere in the Bible do I know it mentions it leading to destruction of society. The only one I know is the very simple quote about God not liking it. Culture celebrates drag queen story hour as a positive activity for children, believed to be a liberating force that will bring hope and peace to a new generation. Now, I didn't have drag queen story hour, but yes, one of my earliest trans memories was being told about the theatrical performance of drag queens and thinking to myself that I wish there was that, but the opposite. Then I was told about drag kings, and let me tell you, I did feel hope in that moment. I also felt less alone. It wasn't exactly what I saw for myself, but it was the closest I have ever had at that point because I didn't know any trans people at all. He also said, queering children, as they call it. No, incorrect. No one calls it that. Not even all LGBT people use the word queer, and especially not queering children. Maybe making a more queer-friendly space for children, but no one is queering children. John moves back to mentioning euthanasia by saying, without a standard, justice becomes relative. For example, in Thomas More's Utopia, where healthcare is free, but those with long-lasting or incurable illnesses are a burden on the system, so they are put to death in the name of the common good. Okay, so a few things. Why are we dragging down the concept of free healthcare? And two, forced euthanasia is unbelievably bad. That is straight up murder. But also, even just having a choice of euthanasia is heavily talked about because people with disabilities have spoken out about how insurances say they would not pay for surgeries or disability aids, but would pay for their death despite the individual never asking for that option. On the topic of euthanasia, if it isn't forced or pressured or the person is left with no other option, technically I see no reason why it shouldn't be available. John Cooper also gives out this warning, so I will repeat it. You better buckle up, Buttercup. We're just getting started. So he talks about the overturning of Roe v. Wade, how his church held a special service to sing, shout, and thank God that he had answered their prayers. But apparently, quote, others accuse celebratory Christians of rubbing their political victory in the noses of pro-choicers, as if we view abortion as a political talking point rather than an issue of injustice that grieves the hearts of God. It is a political issue because even when the option of abortion was a protected right, no one was forcing anyone to get one. John and his church were not celebrating that abortions somehow were now completely unnecessary. They were celebrating the fact that others had to follow their particular rules based on their particular religion. John goes on, fearing tyranny, but can't see his own tyranny he wants to oppose onto others. He actively says, we were instructed to be sensitive of the fears of women, how their liberties were being taken away. Yeah, because that's a big fucking deal. And somehow, even with so many women talking about how the overturn of Roe v. Wade had physically harmed them, Cooper somehow writes all of this in a negative way. John Cooper mentions a progressive pastor named Zach Lambert. As he has no wiki page, and also because Cooper is talking against him, I'm not putting the effort into deep diving into researching him. Anyways, Lambert posted, I really wish the Christians who are celebrating the overturning of Roe could see the anxious and fearful messages I've been getting from women in our congregation today. Maybe take a break from your online victory laps. First off, Cooper fucking misquoted this tweet. It says all day, not today. How hard is it to copy and paste a tweet? It's hard for me to copy this book because it's a stupid fucking sample, so you can't actually highlight anything. So I have to actually type out each of my quotes. But when you're on Twitter, or now X, back in the day when this book was written, it was still Twitter, I believe, you can just copy and paste it. It's just that easy. It doesn't actually change anything. It just shows how well researched and methodical he was about this book. He wasn't. Second, it looks like John skipped over 2 sections of the text, but all he admitted was, quote, and listen to people who are really hurting right now. Why skip over just that half of the sentence? Was that just the line of looking too bad for John, so he just admitted it? Like, why? Okay, anyways, the next line is, I wonder if he would have said the same thing to Christians who celebrated the Emancipation Proclamation that set slaves free. I need you all to know that this thought starts and ends here. It doesn't lead to anything. Moreover, let me just point out that Christianity was a huge part of both sides of the Civil War, and that there were Christian groups that declared slavery to be okay in the eyes of the Lord. I wonder why they thought that. Oh right, because of the multitude of passages mentioning slavery in the Bible. From saying if you offer peace instead of war, you get to take them as slaves, to stating what is and isn't allowed as a slave owner. From the Old Testament to the New, no mention of God being anti-slavery. I want to be abundantly clear. I do not think slavery is okay. Not now, not before. I'm just saying, if John Cooper is so tied to the idea that all moral guidelines can and should be taken straight out of the Bible, it's odd that he doesn't quote the Bible here. Actually, the only semi-anti-slavery quote I know is Deuteronomy 23:15 and 16, which says, "Not to hand a slave back to their master, instead let them live where they choose, and don't oppress them." But even that is not saying God is against slavery. I know someone's thinking it because I was taught it's different, it was different. Yes, the transatlantic slave trade focuses on the dehumanization of slaves versus previously where slaves were a different class of human, but they were still human. Versus, again, with the transatlantic slave trade, it was so horrible because people dehumanized slaves. That being said, yes, also, that also being said, I know people also say that, oh, well, the Bible, the slavery was only for a couple years, but it does go into owning slaves for life, that a slave could commit to a particular master their whole life, and also if they got married while under slavery, the master is able to keep their wife and I believe children. So that isn't really, you can walk free if that means you have to, oh, you gotta be free, but your family doesn't. Your family stays here. You get to stay with your family if you dedicate to a slave, or you dedicate to a master for the rest of your life. It's not free of pressure. It's not free of pressure. It's not free of being forced. There is these forces forcing people into being slaves for life, even in the Bible. So yes, the slavery in the Bible is different than the transatlantic slave trade. That being said, again, still against it. You know, Cooper also did not quote the Bible when it came to abortion. Let me check that out. Oh right, there's no mention of abortion. But to be fair, words change, maybe it's because of that. Well, you see, the only Bible verse I know that's even close to abortion is Numbers 5:11 through 31. But I will shorten it to just 20 and 22. But if you have gone astray while married to your husband, and you have made yourself impure by having sexual relations with a man other than your husband, may this water that brings a curse enter your body, so that your abdomen swells and your womb miscarries. Now, different versions of the Bible are translated differently. I know this, but also your womb miscarries doesn't quite sound like God saying all fertilized eggs must be born. But also, especially in the Old Testament, God does love killing people. I mean, he kills his own son in the New Testament. God aborted his over 30-year-old son. That's a joke, by the way. Sorry, back to Wimpy, Weak, and Woke. John, still talking about Lambert, says, "I wonder why so many women in his church were afraid." I know John is coming from a place of him being holier than thou, but remember how so many people have said banning abortions lead to pregnancies being deadlier. For example, a woman took an abortion pill, but she had a rare side effect of not all the tissue being removed as she needed a D&C. However, her state put new anti-abortion laws in place, which caused her to wait 20 hours for doctors to finally do the routine procedure. But it was too late and she died from that infection. She was my age. By the way, that D&C procedure was the same procedure that one of the Duggar women needed just a few months after this story. These laws and bans kill people. It also can affect good, pure Christian women like the people that go to even John's church. After Texas banned abortion, dozens more pregnancies and postpartum women died in Texas hospitals than had in the years before. The rates of infection also greatly increase. This is why people say abortion is healthcare, because it is. Let's not forget the absolutely dystopian reality of the brain-dead woman who was forced to stay alive via machinery because she was 9 weeks pregnant. Only 9 weeks. By the way, that baby was born in June weighing 1 pound 13 ounces. Finally, in February of the next year, it was home and doing well, but still on oxygen. By the way, that Duggar woman was 11 weeks pregnant when she had her DNC. And this is not trying to be against her. It is very, very traumatic going through something like that. I just want to emphasize this woman was less pregnant. She was not out of the first trimester even a little bit. It's just ludicrous to me. Also, my mom has always said, which brings to euthanasia and to this, my mom has always said if she was in a coma or she was brain dead to just instantly pull the plug unless there is a very high chance of her coming back. This is something that is my mom's greatest fear. Just saying, just pointing that one out there. My mother is a deeply Christian woman, and she explicitly said if she was in a situation like this, my whole life she said this, if she was in a situation like this, to pull the plug. John quotes Proverbs 21:15. When justice is done, it is joy to the righteous and terror to the evildoers. Let's recall Lambert's tweet here when I quote 21:13. Whoever shut their ears to the cry of the poor will also cry out and not be answered. It's just funny to think of that in relation to the only part of the tweet that John cuts out about listening to people. The next part is just muck of nonsense that leads to John straight up saying, if we don't have answers from the Bible, then where must we get them? Secular humanism has infected Christianity. I'm just highlighting this to cite more of my sources that he believes the Bible is the only place to get plans to build a moral and just society. He then talks about different ways he disagrees with other Christians based on their interpretation of the Bible, so I'm going to skip all that. Then we get to COVID. Cooper was upset that in California's 2020 strict lockdown, strip clubs, abortion clinics, and liquor stores were allowed to stay open, but churches were not permitted to meet in person. Now, I'm not in California, however I got a little thing called the internet. Yes, some clubs did stay open because of what type of business they technically were. So if they were a restaurant and they followed the rules of a restaurant versus being a bar or live entertainment venues, they could stay open. And yes, people were fighting the lockdown, just like John here. However, the clinics are healthcare, so of course they are open. Also, I know around here all abortion clinics actually help with a bunch of reproductive health matters. They aren't exclusively doing abortions. And as far as liquor stores, I don't see why they wouldn't be open. Again, they are stores. Grocery stores were open. And before John or anyone thinks they're better than others because they don't drink, neither do I. I never thought of liquor stores to be a problem, but yes, I did judge people for going to strip clubs. Not because they were strip joints, but because why would you go to a restaurant at all during a global pandemic that killed people and have filled up every bed in the hospital? Side note, I have never had COVID, but I also didn't go to church nor restaurants during peak COVID times. Anyways, John gets all dramatic and says, but going to church is illegal. It wasn't just Christians. All religious gatherings were not allowed. He goes on to talk about a pastor who defiantly opened his church at this time. Again, bashing other places that also went against these rules, but they weren't defined in this, oh, it was so defiant and great. It was seen as a bad thing. It's not really the point I want to talk about. The point is who he is. John MacArthur. Unironically, he was pro-slavery. I talked about slavery earlier to show how fucking ludicrous Cooper was for saying the Bible is always correct, and here is MacArthur proving that there's always worse. If you want to know more about him, he was also misogynistic, homophobic, and apparently asked some female victims of domestic violence to return to their husbands or face excommunication. Okay, wow. Cooper, you can side with that guy. I don't want to be on his side. Ever. Nope. But then, John switches from just saying churches should be allowed to stay open to saying, quote, the ineffectiveness of vaccines, global masking, and stay-at-home mandates. Now, as I said in my last video, I can't actually access his sources here, but here are my sources. The World Health Organization affirms that getting an up-to-date COVID-19 vaccine continues to be the most effective way of preventing severe disease of COVID-19. And one study found that an up-to-date COVID-19 vaccine received in the last 6 months was 72% effective at preventing hospitalization related to COVID-19 and 67% effective in preventing more serious outcomes related to COVID-19, including admission to the ICU and death. Here is about masks and respirators slowing the spread of the virus that causes COVID-19 when they are worn consistently, fit properly, and worn correctly. And here is a study about stay-at-home orders. Although residents in both groups were staying at home even before the implementation of any orders, these orders reduced the numbers of new COVID-19 cases by 7.6%. Even so, people already were staying at home. The order helped an extra 7.6%. Take that as you will. John continues being upset with other Christians for their response to COVID and the lockdown, then builds up to the next topic. He says, although a Gnostic utopia disbelieves in a superior being, this doesn't mean the spiritual beliefs and even faiths are not required. On the contrary, utopia ideas are quite mystical and require an immense amount of faith. The Bible's explanation in man's origin and telos requires faith in God. Secular utopia's teaching of the same requires faith in man. I want to clarify, this here is why I was pushing the difference between utopia, the fictional idea, and utopia, which John ties to the here and now. Like I said before, people aren't just praying to the universe for a perfect world. What people are doing are fighting for a better tomorrow and hopefully a better one after that and after that. Not through faith, but actual tangible results. But yes, on the topic of the beginning of humans, yes, non-Christians will look to what they personally believe to be the origin of human. Because they're not Christian. So they're not going to believe that God made humans. It wouldn't make sense because they're not Christian. They don't believe in God. John does a quick breakdown of the history of sin in the Bible and how no one is perfect when we get to this quote. Even when society commits to doing good and shares a common purpose, man's ability is constrained by his human nature. We see this in the good-hearted but misplaced attempt by liberals and progressives to eradicate poverty and crime. Perhaps their hearts are in the right place, but due to men's constrained nature, we can't fix it. In fact, time and again, we create more poverty and worse crimes because we refuse to use the plan of God. Honestly, I don't know what to say here, because I already said it all at the end of my last video. What are we supposed to do then? Nothing? Don't even try to make fair laws? But also, John just said the laws were unfair when it came to COVID restrictions, and how Christian leaders need to fight the system, but now we're supposed to do nothing? This is just John being hypocritical again. Then we go back to the topic of abortion. Utopia doesn't just demand access to murder. It demands that the killing of the poorer people's children is paid for by the wealthy. Yeah, so stop right there. With the idea of a tax-based healthcare, so people aren't harmed or die from preventable deaths, what happens is a percent of money you make is taken and given to these programs. So, let's say I have $100 and 10% was taken. 10% is not what is actually taken, by the way. It's just for easy math. 10 of my dollars would be used for these causes. Now, if someone has $1,000 and 10% is taken, then they chip in $100. But because it is a percent, it is equal for us both. Also, these taxes are not exclusively being used in healthcare. They go towards all government programs. Food, shelter, the insane war budget proposal the president put forward, which would include cutting the other programs I mentioned. I know which one I find to be in line with human flourishing. The point is, this right here is not a religious argument, it is a political one. Which is funny because John loves to say he isn't political. But let's move on. The rich is paying not only for the disproportionate killing of the poor, but also of non-whites, in the name of equality. According to protectingblacklife.org, census data from 2010 shows that 79% of Planned Parenthood surgical abortion facilities are located within walking distance of African American or Hispanic/Latino neighborhoods. Well, yeah, I don't remember the last time I saw any surgical offices in suburbs near here. I do remember the last Planned Parenthood I passed, it was in the city. Cities are walkable and have a ton of people living there, so that stat makes sense. Cities are also easy to travel to if you live not in the city. So it makes sense that that is where they are located. Now, I'm white, so I don't want to talk over the organization he mentions. However, it itself talks about prayer and not having sex outside of marriage. However, the main topic is about a system being discriminatory against racial minorities, aka racism. However, John in the pre-show of this book talks about how he doesn't believe in systematic racism, which he is now calling out right here. Which is it, John? Is systematic racism real or not? The Christian God loves life. The God of man loves death. He repeats himself so much, I think I already said this, but I will say it again. The Bible has a whole lot of death in it for a God that loves life. Cooper quotes a guy named R.J. Rushdoony, who apparently supports the death penalty. Wait, wasn't John just talking about how the God of man was the one that loves death? And was accused of being a Holocaust denier. He also did not believe that interracial marriage should be allowed. By the way, the point I'm making by looking up the men John quote, which by the way they're all men, is to highlight the den of shit that he surrounds himself in. Then John jumps off the deep end. We must choose between the totalizing kingdom of God or the totalizing false kingdom of Utopia. No, we don't. No, we don't. Some are religious and some are not. We, as in the world as a whole, can in fact have a third way. John has yet to show a legitimate argument about how he himself as a Christian is being oppressed. Only about how he isn't allowed to force everyone to follow his religion to a T. Yet again, he mentions you are either Christian or you are not. And if you are not, life will surely come crashing down. Oh, I'm crashing, that's for sure. But seriously, yeah, of course, you are either Christian or you're not. Just like how everything is red unless it's not. Everyone is cis unless you are not. Everyone is Muslim unless you are not. Everything is a car unless it's not. You see what I mean? And another thing, the Bible never fucking says you have to force everyone to build their metaphorical house on the rock instead of the sand. Let people build their lives where they want. Cooper then repeats the same quotes of the Bible as before, saying there is no nuance of the word of the Lord, the Bible. Blah blah blah, utopia equals death, God equal life. God help me. He goes on talking about how he thinks Christians should view the concepts of heaven and earth, poo-pooing non-Christians. For someone who said in the first fucking thing of this book that we need to not fall into the argument of us versus them, he is really digging a deep trench between Christians and non-Christians, going so far to saying that we have fundamentally different definitions of love, peace, and justice. This is also where John really starts bringing up Marx and Marxist ideas in a negative way, of course, which will come up again later. John obviously is also being anti-communist and anti-socialist, and seems to be pro-capitalist but hasn't fully said that yet. I swear, if Cooper uses the term Woke-topia one more time, I'll end up like Maud in the musical episode of season 2 of Maud. Can you tell I just watched Maud? Or Wimpy Christianity's Jesus would be in danger of choking on his own H&M scarf that he's wearing in the summer and spilling his Starbucks latte. I don't have anything to say, I just been staring at this line thinking if and how to talk about it, because I don't want to touch on his weird infighting with other Christians, but I did want to force you all to also experience hearing this sentence. Cooper also says Wimpy Jesus would not mention hell because that's not nice and it might give someone the sads. Now this is where me growing up Christian comes in, because talking about hell didn't give me the sads. It was used against me to make me feel shame for being who I am. It was harmful because I felt like I was already living in hell and that would continue even after death. Forever. No matter how hard I prayed, I couldn't ever truly stop being trans. People like John used our shared religion as a weapon against me. Maybe God does hate me for being trans. Maybe God did make me this way for a reason. Maybe there is no God. I don't know, but I do know I am now at peace and I'm happy and confident in being trans. No thanks to people like John. He then goes on talking against wokeness, with his simple definition of woke being political correctness on steroids, an obsession with seeking justice for the oppressed, as defined by neo-Marxism. The term woke was first used by the Black community here in the US in relation to learning and keeping their eyes open to the injustices their community faced and still faces. Some do use it for anyone facing injustices. That being said, what does John say about justice? Justice no longer becomes a static metric based on biblical standards, but on victimhood. What does that mean? John never actually explains how Christianity would stop injustices. Again, I say I grew up in church every Sunday and every other Wednesday. I saw people being racist to black families to the point that they left the church. My dear friend, whom was black and probably still is, I just haven't talked to him for a while, was likened to a monkey in appearance. My church tried to have a Hispanic service in order to try and raise more money, but every time something happened, the overwhelmingly white leaders of the church blamed them. Missing paper towel roll? It must have been them. Never mind the door was locked and they not having a key. And later, when a white teen boy said he took it, the leaders could not take back their insults and racist remarks. This is only one example of racism that happened. They stopped hosting the Hispanic services just as fast as they started, by the way. Don't worry, John then says he will explain what he means by all this. I'd love to hear it. But before we get into that, it's super cute that he calls his wife superhuman. But before in the book, he talked about how utopia was only possible if man was a superman, which he said was wrong, flawed, and impossible. Keep your story straight, Cooper. Can humans be super or not? He talks about working 16 to 19-hour workdays, being so physically exhausted to the point of being routinely sick to his stomach, and also sitting behind a wheel of a 14-foot bus with a trailer attached, which put everyone's lives in danger. Cooper also mentioned slowly having saved up and getting a loan to buy that bus. They made a yearly profit for the first time, the profit being $9,000. He says, we had implemented the wisdom of God's word through our work ethic. We didn't get deep into debt, but you did get a loan, which can get people into debt if their business doesn't work out. Also, I would love to hear John's take on student loans, given the fact that his small fortune, as he calls it later on, of $9,000 isn't even enough for one semester at most universities here in the USA. Cooper says too many on the Christian left and the woke social justice warriors, keeping that money is a form of injustice. He argues that the Bible says it's good to slowly accumulate money and that he didn't need to give it to the poor. I'm just saying John is fighting awfully hard to say that he has the right to keep his money in relation to what other Christians say about it all. And I want to add one more opinion into that ring. May I point to Mark 12:41 to 44. Jesus sat down opposite to the place where the offerings were put, and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins, worth only a few cents. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on." So my question to John is, if Jesus praised the widow with no income giving her last 2 coins, then why would you not want to do the same? Maybe it's because one shouldn't take the Bible as a one-for-one meaning into real life. And here is the metaphor that made me fucking lose it the first time I read this sample of this book. It's a long quote trying to disprove the notion of, if I receive a bigger portion, then someone else gets a lesser portion. So sorry in advance. Quote, "It's as if we are all at a 4th of July." I'm so sorry. It's as if we are all at a 4th of July celebration, and there is a limited amount of potato salad. The more you eat, the less there is for someone else. The goal is to redistribute the potato salad, which is limited, so that everyone has an equal share. Something the woke worldview doesn't understand, that resources, food, and material don't just appear out of thin air. We learned that if the potato salad runs out, someone can make more. Someone else can compete by making a better potato salad, or even a noodle salad. Perhaps someone may grow their own potatoes and sell them at the farmer's market, so that each person can create his own potato salad. In this case, even after everyone at the party had their fill, there would be enough potato salad left over to give to the poor. In woke economics, potato salad magically appears in privileged people's refrigerators, and they inadvertently stole it from those who are less privileged. I know that was long, but I didn't want to interrupt it the first time in order to break it down. But now let's break it down. First, this is a bad and completely useless metaphor that doesn't stay consistent throughout the argument. Let's take it as a literal party, where the only literal food is potato salad, and the host made the salad. Yes, the fair thing to do is to give everyone food to eat. Don't take my word for it. Jesus was the one who fed the disciples and his 2 fish and 5 loaves to over 5,000. Matthew 14:13-21. However, if this was literal, then telling people to go out and grow their own potatoes makes no sense, because they are there at the party. If someone already has the assets, aka the ingredients, yes, making potato salad is no big deal. But in order to grow the potatoes for more salad, that person would need food to survive in the meantime. So why should some be able to get a full plate and others don't even get a tiny bite? Also, I didn't write it in my notes. I don't think, maybe, yeah. Also, I didn't write it in my notes, but also I thought the whole metaphor of the party was inherently like everyone on earth or like everyone in the US, but then it's like we have enough to feed the poor. Was the poor not invited to this party? I don't understand. It like, even as a metaphor, like even not even tied to reality, it doesn't make sense because it doesn't tell me who is at the party, what is the situation? It doesn't make any sense. It really gets me. Now let's break down John saying potato salad magically appears in people's fridge. No. What the so-called woke say is someone like Elon Musk, I know I don't want to think about him either, but hear me out. He has a ton of potato salad already in his fridge. He has potato farms and warehouses of all the other ingredients. I'm sorry. This is fucked up to talk about through a childish metaphor. Some of Elon Musk's money comes from children mining for cobalt. John says you make money by doing labor, but how many of those children, literal children, will ever even be a tenth of how rich Musk is? Elon doesn't lift a single finger to make potato salad. He pays people with spoonfuls of potato salad in order for him to have gallons of it. And even if he somehow ate all of the made potato salad he has, which is practically impossible, he has so much assets he will never be the one mining for cobalt. God, I am so tired of this, but we are so close to the end of chapter 1. 11 pages of notes, by the way, and we aren't even done with the chapter. John then says, I didn't need that money. I could continue to work 16 through 18 hours a day. I didn't need to hire a bus driver. I didn't need to buy my wife a Christmas present or set aside funds for my kid's orthodontist. And according to woke economics and the principles of some Christian leaders, if I owe as much of my money as I can possibly give and I don't, then I am unjust. Side note, he changed from saying 16 through 19 hours a day to now saying 16 through 18, just pointing out yet another inconsistency. I've been quoting the Bible, and yeah, I can quote Matthew 19:21 and 24, which Jesus talks about abandoning earthly possessions, but let's talk away from the Bible and more into woke economics, as Cooper calls it. I don't know anyone that says if you run a business and you finally make more than you spend, you have to give it all away. Never. I have heard people calling out people like Musk, but not an honest worker. I have heard people on the left talk about ethical work practices like working fair hours, which is deemed 40 hours a week, often broken up into 5 8-hour workdays with mandatory breaks. I heard of minimum wage, which was originally supposed to mean what we now call living wage. I think it is perfectly reasonable to say yes, John needs a tour bus driver, because it was dangerous for John to be unknowledgeable about driving a bus and being so tired as John was to drive a bus with a trailer attached. And the worst part of what John said is I have heard people talking about how even if you didn't make a profit, your kids should still be able to go to the orthodontist or any doctor no matter what. Which just goes to prove that John doesn't even know what the woke is fighting for. Wokeness leads to negative outcomes for the very people whose social justice warriors claim they want to help. But then tell me, John, why here in the United States I didn't get to go to the dentist for 10 years as a kid, no cavities by the way, 0 cavities, but over in Sweden my friend could go to the dentist for free up until they were in their 20s. Sweden seems to be surviving just fine, but yet here in the United States people still can't take their kids to the dentist. Go fuck yourself if you think this way. If you think even a little bit like John, go fuck yourself, sit and spin on a knife, I don't fucking care, okay? I would say do actual research, but I know from researching my rebuttal to this book, I know John doesn't do research at all. Power is distributed according to these social groups, and justice becomes a matter of equalizing social power. Each group gets an equal amount of potato salad. That sounds good, right? Wrong. John said that in a negative way. Rather than living according to eternal fixed standards of moral law. What groups were John just talking about? Oh, just misogyny, racism, homophobia / transphobia. I'm actually losing it. How can anyone say that with their whole chest that they are against justice for those things? It's also incongruent with arguments that he made in this very book. I just don't know how John can write. The secular woke are attempting to change the world through engineering outcomes and bringing economic and political liberation to the marginalized. As if that sentence makes him sound like he is on the right side of all of this. It's because he says it will fail, yet what's his so-called solution exactly? Not changing a damn thing? He then ends chapter 1 with the same quote about burning Utopia to the ground that he used to end the prologue. Now that we've read the whole chapter, I want to revisit the Lady Freaky Deaky story from the beginning of the chapter. I don't actually remember if I told you guys that's what he called the old lady. Everything I'm about to say I completely disagree with, by the way. However, John loves to say everything we need to know is in the Bible. Well, according to the Bible, if that woman was being sexual and John didn't shout for help, it would be his fault. Just like if a woman was raped in the city and didn't shout for help, she herself would be killed. Deuteronomy 22:24. The Bible can be wrong. No one should take the Bible one for one. John knows this. He proves that when he says he will take from parts of the Bible saying that he should save up money and not the parts that's saying he should give everything away. The reason I have been quoting the Bible is to prove just how wrong it is to say what John is saying about following the Bible to a T. By the way, I lied in my first video. This isn't going to include chapter 2 if you haven't figured that out already. It's going to be its own thing. Oops, my bad. I didn't realize where chapter 2 actually started. Goodbye, and God help me. And if you believe any of the same bullshit John does, fuck off.